Namaste. Welcome to Androidiots Podcast. I am Anupam Singh.
I am Tushar Gupta. We talk about what's new in Android, best practices, and how to be a better Android developer.
So hi guys, we have discussed a lot of Android till date, and all of us love Kotlin. It makes programming fun. We have a lot of requests asking about how to use Kotlin as a backend language. And today we have Matt Thornfield joining us from a different continent altogether to discuss the same. So, about Matt. Matt is a full-time trainer, a software development consultant. He has a number of courses on LinkedIn Learning. He's also an author of Building Spring Boot Applications with Kotlin, distributed by Manning Publication. He is currently the director of Capability Training Management Limited. He is also a specialist in Java Enterprise, Hadoop, and NoSQL. So, Matt, did we miss something in the introduction?
Well, that makes me sound amazing, so thank you very much for that. So yeah, I'm a full-time trainer, as you say, primarily working with back-end systems around the Spring Boot framework, which I think we'll be talking a bit about today. And I got into Kotlin probably in the last sort of 18 months, really. I have some Android experience, but it's very basic, so I'm more of a back-end rather than a front-end programmer. But I guess I've been doing this full-time for about the last 7 years now. And prior to that, I actually worked as a professional developer for a couple of different banks. So that's my sort of experience in the background, really, as a developer.
Cool.
So let's start with Kotlin. How have you enjoyed Kotlin till now?
I always think that something is enjoyable if you feel like, as you're doing it, you're really passionate about what you're doing. And for me, I got that passion back about programming when I'm working in Kotlin. And I think that's mainly because so I'm traditionally a Java developer, right? And most of what I do is Java. And it takes away, I find, a lot of the pain of Java. And I guess we might talk a bit about that. I mean, as Android developers, I'm sure you've experienced exactly the same thing.
Yeah, I've done that for years.
So to me, it really makes programming enjoyable. I think really because you can get straight down into the detail of what you're trying to achieve and not have to spend all that time thinking about the classes you're creating and the structure around it and all that kind of boilerplate code that we seem to spend hours and hours writing. So I'm a big Kotlin fan, definitely.
Okay. And you're talking about you're predominantly a backend developer, and a Java developer. So what is the stack that you work on? Can you explain a little bit?
Yeah, so for backend systems in Java, there's really, I think, two rival camps. There are people who use the enterprise Java approach, so that's Java EE with an application server. And there are people who go down the Spring framework approach. So for those who aren't aware, Spring is a independent project. It's managed, funded by Pivotal, that creates a huge range of different frameworks and plugins and tools to be used around Java. And by Java, I really mean the Java virtual machine, so not just the Java language, that allow you to create functioning systems that are suitable for use at an enterprise-wide level. And really, for the point of, just to keep things simple, if you were creating a backend for an Android application, you're really looking at something that's going to sit on a server somewhere that will be able to interact through REST, I guess, to the front-end systems, be they Android or anything else, and talk to some kind of database. Okay. And so Spring gives you that flexibility and the ability to set it all up very quickly and easily.
So how can anyone start with Spring?
The quick way to get started is through a Spring project called Spring Boot. And what Spring Boot will do is get you up and running with actually really what I've just described. So a project that has the interface to a database. So you'd set up your own database, but it will do the interface bit for you. A web front end, if you want that, a REST front end, or REST interface, I should say, and the way of setting up an MVC architecture. So I'm not sure if everyone listening will be aware, MVC stands for Model View Control. It's a way of architecting to keep your business logic separate from your view, separate from the data at the back end. Yes. And Spring Boot has a website that you can go onto, type in what you're looking for. So the website I should have said is start.spring.io. And you go onto that website, you say, I want to build a project that's going to have these facilities. And actually it creates for you a zip file that you can then open in your favorite IDE, and that will have the project all set up, ready for you to start writing your code. So very quick, very easy way to get up and running. And as part of that process, you actually specify on that website what programming language are you going to use. They currently support Java, Kotlin, and Groovy. I guess we'll be talking about Kotlin today. But to get your project up and running, very quick and easy to do.
When you were making backend, let's say, which is predominantly in Java, can you just elaborate a little bit about what are the benefits of switching a Java predominant backend to Kotlin, and what are the complexities that you might have faced doing so?
Okay, so I think we've already talked about one of the main benefits, which is you do a lot less typing of the boilerplate code. Mm-hmm. So things like using data classes, for example, will save you an awful lot of typing. For me, I think one of the big benefits is the fact that the code is going to be more robust. So one of the big features of Kotlin is the ability to have immutable variables and the null safety features around Kotlin. So this idea of you should be able to write code that means you'll never get a null pointer exception. When you're writing a back end, so the interface between your users and your backend is going to be over REST. It's a level separate from if you're writing your front end like as a website running on the same server. When an error occurs, that is going to be really difficult to try and find and trace and work through. So avoiding null pointer exceptions is actually really important. And then the final bit is if you're wanting to do any kind of functional programming in your back end, so if you've got a load of data and you want to process it so that you can send just a small amount through to your user to view, that processing, if you're going to do sort of in Java, you'd probably be using streams. It's much more intuitive in Kotlin to do functional programming. So you can write much more complex algorithms a lot more easily in Kotlin than you could do using the Java streams approach. So those are the pluses. There are, I don't think I want to say negatives, but there's a couple of complexities to switching to Kotlin, which is why I've done a course really, is to talk a bit about that. And it's around really making the data side work. So I don't know if you're aware of, your users will be aware of JPA, which is the Java Persistence API. That's the main framework that projects use to talk, if you like, to production standard databases. So you could be using MySQL or Oracle, PostgreSQL, or even non-SQL databases. And JPA provides the link between your code and that database. So there's some complexities around using the facilities of Kotlin, like immutable variables, data classes, with JPA. And there's some tweaks, if you like, you need to do in your project to make it work.
Are there any performance implications when you use Kotlin over Java?
So I love that question. Yes, but I think they're worth it. So Kotlin doesn't actually perform as well as Java. Is for some people that's shocking news, right? Yeah. And the reason why, the only way I can describe this actually is I did a bit of work looking at the bytecode. So if you write a piece of code in Java and you write the same piece of code in Kotlin and you compile them and then decompile the bytecode that's been created. So just to be clear for everyone, Kotlin is compiled to bytecode that can run on the Java virtual machine. in exactly the same way that Java would be. And that bytecode is fully compatible, but it's not identical. And the reason it's not identical is because of these things like the null safety checks that Kotlin lets you do. So if you declare a variable in Kotlin as being a non-nullable variable, and then at some point later you assign a value to that variable, the bytecode has an extra step in it that says, I need to check that this is not null before I allow you to do this assigning, right? So there's some extra bytecode that goes in that isn't there in the Java version. And because of that, Kotlin will be a little bit slower. So we're talking fractions of a second, if I'm honest. And as I say, I think that's absolutely worth it in most scenarios, even if you're trying to write something that's going to be really high performance, really scalable, that it's not going to be enough of a performance hit to say, I've got to choose something over Kotlin. Because actually, if you're looking for that kind of robustness and scalability, you want the null safety features. You want those extra safeguards that Kotlin's giving you. So yeah, it is a little bit slower, but probably not measurable for most people, and certainly even at huge scales, not to something which will cause me any kind of concern. And I run a couple of websites that have a reasonable number of users using it, and they've got one of them at least now has a Kotlin backend, and we'll be looking at possibly moving the other one to a Kotlin backend as we redevelop certain parts of it.
Okay, so about that. So is it straightforward to switch from Java to Kotlin if you already know Kotlin?
So if you already know Kotlin, then absolutely. So you're learning, if you know Spring Boot and you know Java and you want to switch to Kotlin, which is the sort of the scenario I'm coming from. So that's most of the people I meet are going through that process. Obviously, the going from Java to Kotlin is relatively straightforward. There's some syntax things to learn. If you want to get the most out of Kotlin, then you want to learn about its different features, because, of course, you could write Java code effectively in Kotlin, or most of it, or you can let the IDE do the translation for you, but you're not going to get all the benefit if you do that. So that there's a bit of a learning process there. But then once you know Kotlin, to switch from using Spring in Java to Spring in Kotlin, as I say, is pretty straightforward. There's a couple of tweaks around data, and there's a bit of design choices you need to make. So this is probably less important for Android developers because you won't probably be creating a web front end at the same time. But if you are, when you do that, you normally would create something we'd call a backing bean. So a class that will support data that a user might be typing in on a form. You would need to do that in a slightly different way to make it work with Kotlin. The default, which would be to use a data class, doesn't work. So there's some tweaks you need to do, but they're nothing too complicated, really. And I should say Kotlin is fully supported by Spring. So in the same way that Google have said, if you want to build an Android, Kotlin is absolutely the way to go. Well, now that's the same for Spring as well. So if you are starting out today as an Android developer or as a backend developer, and you ask me the question, should I be doing Java, should I be doing Kotlin? There is absolutely no reason to say go for Kotlin. And I perhaps should just say I'm not being paid by Kotlin or anything by IntelliJ. I just really think it adds so much value as a developer.
Right. And are you aware of companies or people who are using Kotlin with Spring, so that basically it enhances the confidence in people, right, that Kotlin is being actually used?
Yeah, very much so. So I'm based in the United Kingdom. There's a company quite near us, which is a rather major online gaming company, and they certainly are using it for all sorts of different things. They're quite a technologically forward-thinking. So they like adopting new technologies early and experimenting with them to see how they can add value to their company. But it's getting more and more wide use there. Again, both for Android and for backends using Spring, because I think they're seeing the productivity, what they can achieve, is greater. They can get more code written that's more productive and is safer a lot quicker. And it's certainly, the fact that now Google are behind it, Pivotal are behind it, it's getting worldwide adoption. A few years ago, everyone was talking about Scala in the Java world. Yeah. And I think Kotlin's overtaking Scala. I was a big fan of Groovy. I think Groovy is pretty much dying. If there's any programming languages for the Java virtual machine other than Java that are likely to have longevity and are going to get that support, Kotlin's the number one after Java now, I think. I looked a little while ago at I never know how you pronounce this, TIOBE, TIOBE index for programming jobs, and it measures different programming languages and how popular they're becoming. And certainly Kotlin is on the ascendant and is getting much higher up that graph now.
Right. And how do you compare Kotlin to Scala? As in, Scala itself is a very strong and modern language, right? So
I don't know that much Scala. I've never written an application in Scala, primarily because for the Java developer, it's a massive learning curve. It's so different from what you know. And so for me, the big advantage of Kotlin is it's a much easier transition process to move from Java to Kotlin. And I think that's possibly why it's had such greater adoption than Scala. One of the things I teach is the Apache Spark. So again, I'm not sure if you're aware of that or if your listeners will be. It's a framework for processing big data. And you can do Spark in Java or Scala. And I don't think you can do Spark yet in Kotlin, but I'm sure that will come. But actually, if you were starting Spark today, most Spark developers have traditionally been Scala because it was built in Scala, it's designed for Scala, and they've had to, I think, transition to make it more available for Java to get the bigger user base out there. The number of Scala developers is small, and I can't see that growing now. There's no compelling reason for me to use Scala, definitely.
And talking about Spring Boot backend, how will an Android developer start building a small Spring Boot application? What are the steps that you would that will help out an Android developer?
Okay, so I guess got to start from the point of view. So what might the average Android developer want to do? Why might you need a backend? If you're going to use it purely for storing data, then you probably wouldn't go through the full process of building your own customized backend. You'd use one of the systems out there specifically designed just to be a backend database. But let's say, as an example, I don't know, say you've built a quiz application, but in order to calculate the score, there's some complex processing going on, or you might want to do some kind of analytics that tells you where your score is compared to other people taking it. So you've got a bit more work to do. What you want from the Android point of view then is some kind of REST interface, I guess you're going to call, that says, I'll submit this score and give me back, please, some kind of data in a certain format. So that's what we're trying to build, is an interface along those lines. So the starting point is to go to that website I mentioned, start.spring.io, and say I want to build a new Kotlin project that's going to have REST and databases, and possibly not much else. Actually, if you do my course, you'll learn there's other things that are beneficial to get for the development process, one called DevTools, but you don't need that. That's not, the minimum is going to be databases and the REST front-end bit. That gives you something you download, you unzip it, you open it as a project, and then I guess in this particular example, you need to create something called a controller, which is what gives you the REST front end. And that allows you to define the URL and a method that's going to be run when that URL is hit, and that's going to take in any parameters that are in that URL. I don't want to go too deep here, but obviously there's different ways of doing get and post. So you build that all in as well. But really, what it's giving you is the ability to run a method, a Kotlin function, if you like, that will be triggered every time a particular URL is hit. And once you've then written your code behind that, you can build that into a jar file, a runnable jar file that you can stick on a server somewhere, just run it, and then that's ready to go. There's a little bit more to it, obviously, but it's a relatively quick and straightforward process.
Cool. We'll definitely put your course in our show notes so that the listeners can benefit from it. And any questions? Anything?
I don't think so. So I guess we learned a brief, but yes, we learned a path, like what is Spring Boot and why Kotlin is having a better adoption than other languages for Java-based backends. and few steps to go along with it.
One last question: where do you see how do you see the future of Kotlin? Do you see taking it over the entire programming community, just like JavaScript has?
Well, it's an interesting question. I'm sure I read once that the company behind Kotlin, which is IntelliJ, wanted it to overtake Java, right? So Java worldwide is the most used, I won't say popular, but it's the most used programming language. And at one point, I'm sure they said they wanted to overtake Java. I don't think they want to say that now. But it's certainly... it's going to carry on growing. I can't see it overtaking Java, but because it's compatible with, then as bits of Java systems get redeveloped, Kotlin will probably be the way that the system they'll use to redevelop those systems. We're moving to a world which is a lot more polyglot. So you use different applications or different programming languages to achieve different aspects of systems that are all going to fit together. We have a rather large Java-based system that we are redeveloping into microservices. So we're taking small bits out of the monolith, out of the very big system, and making small bits out of it. Some of those we're doing in Kotlin. I'm currently writing one bit which is going to be a web front end in Angular, because that's now seen as the tool to use for web front ends. Clearly, if you're writing bits that are going to be in apps, you'll be doing that in Android or in whatever Apple use these days. So I think Kotlin is very much the tool for new development. If I'm starting a new project today, I would be wanting to use Kotlin. The only thing that would stop me, I think, is going to be if I need to get up and running quickly with a pool of developers who don't know it yet. I've got to weigh up moving them to Kotlin, which is really not that big a process, versus getting them up and running with whatever tool they know. But, companies out there, certainly larger companies, aren't now, I don't think, saying we only program in insert your language here. But Kotlin is, I think it will continue to grow. But the languages out there that have got wide usage, like C, for example, they're going nowhere as well. So Java's not going anywhere. But if you're starting today, you don't need to know Java. You can build Android apps in Kotlin. You can build backends in Kotlin.
Absolutely.
So yes, it will broaden your knowledge if you know Java. Obviously, it's a good thing to know, but it's not an essential for you to be productive.
Right. And just to add to it, we even met Hadi Hariri. He's VP of Developer Advocacy at JetBrains, the company who created basically Kotlin.
All right.
And we met him, and he said that even companies like Airbnb and some big companies in Dubai, they're actually experimenting a lot with Kotlin in their backend. So I think the future of Kotlin is quite bright.
And it's certainly going to be, because you can build more quickly with it and more reliably. It's got to be the future for now. Of course, who knows whether another language is going to come along in the next few days, which will then be the new big thing. But I think Kotlin does some of the things Scala didn't do. It's the ease of transition makes Kotlin a viable option. I was a big fan of Groovy, and Groovy is a great language. And you can build Spring Boot in Groovy, right? So it's had adoption, but it's not got. I don't know what it is about Groovy that meant it didn't have the future. Although I guess the developer, the person behind Groovy, did say he wouldn't have bothered inventing it if Scala had been around. So it doesn't do some of the things Kotlin does, right? It doesn't have all of that null safety stuff in there. So. But yeah, I think and actually just looking at, you've mentioned my course is published by Manning, looking at their list of things you can do in Kotlin, that's slowly growing as well. So it's not just for Android, it's not just for backends, there are all sorts of things you can do in Kotlin. And as you can tell, I'm very enthusiastic about it.
Okay,
thanks, Matt. Thanks for your time. We don't have any questions for Shah.
No, it was a very great talk with you. We learned a lot. And I'm pretty sure our listeners also learned a lot from this episode.
Thank you. It's been really fun talking to you.
Thanks, Matt. Cheers.
Cheers.